Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Radical Imagination of Black Women, Ambition, Politics, and Power by Pearl K. Ford Dowe. Read by L. Malaika Cooper. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear reference to an appendix present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Introduction. You can pray until you faint, but unless you get up and try to do something, God is not going to put it in your lap. Fannie Lou Hamer. The idea for this project came to me one day in 2014 while reading online news articles. Two articles argued that white women candidates were critical to potential Democratic victories in Republican-led Southern legislatures. My research on Black politics and electoral politics prompted me to question that premise. I knew that Black women were more likely to be victorious in their campaign efforts than white women, and that nationwide, white women were more likely to vote Republican, not only in the South. Both my knowledge and the flaws in these articles led me to think more deeply about Black women who seek office and those already serving. Who were the Black women who had run for elective office? Why did they run? And how did they win? I reflected upon my own experiences and observations of Black political women. Growing up in Savannah, Georgia, in a working-class family and a neighborhood of both Black working and middle-class families, I was immersed in Black culture and the ways that Black people understood and did politics. I found politics interesting, and during election cycles often observed Black candidates, men and women, and community members on the news advocating for issues relevant to the Black community. The women who ran for office were similar to the circle of Black women I knew. Many of these women were engaged in and spoke highly of the organizations and churches to which they belonged. Members, and even non-members, respected those organizational affiliations. For example, as high school students do, I, along with my peers, casually complained about teachers we considered too hard or exams that seemed too difficult. One day, my group walked into our biology class complaining about the math exam we had just taken. Our biology teacher, whom we considered one of the cooler teachers, stopped us short. Her coolness turned to harshness. She was not, she said, going to stand by and let us speak ill of her sorority sister. Her response ignited my curiosity about what a sorority is and why our cool teacher was so serious about it. Women like my biology teacher were not only proud sorority women, but were also members of other organizations. Some of these women could be referred to as superjoiners, as they not only were members of Black sororities, but also were actively engaged in other organizations, such as the Links Incorporated, Top Ladies of Distinction Incorporated, and Jack and Jill of America, whose membership is made up of professional, college-educated, middle-class Black women. These same women often boast about their historically Black college and university, HBCU, alma maters, during homecoming season. This included the local HBCU, Savannah State, which would become my alma mater. The local Black newspaper often featured these women for their church and civic engagement. These were the women who ran for office and won. Due to my sorority affiliation and HBCU alumni status, I often engaged with Black women elites who were similar to the women I knew and witnessed growing up. These Black women were entrenched in a network of civic and social organizations and community networks that were sometimes linked to churches and HBCUs. I observed when a member of these networks ran for office, she often could rely on fellow network members to campaign on her behalf. After much contemplation, I knew I had a project. It took several years of reading, writing, and pondering the best approach to this project before I realized that I needed to tell the story of how Black women make the decision to run for office and how they win. Eventually, I came to realize that for many Black women, the resources located within their communities and networks motivated their decision-making process and provided opportunities that led to their electoral success. The central argument of the radical imagination of Black women, ambition, politics, and power is that elite Black women have a unique political ambition that compels them to move beyond service to seek office. Black women's unique experience of being Black and a woman has shaped their worldview, commitment to community, and how they address and understand their position within society. The literature on political ambition has largely overlooked Black women's political engagement. Why? Because social science in general and political science in particular often neglect the unique and abiding dynamics of Black political culture, a culture that cultivates public opinion and offers resources for potential candidates. But as well as filling in that gap, I also seek to move the extant literature beyond the premise that the political ambition of Black women is less than white women or men. It appears so because political science approaches political participation very narrowly. Other than voting, political science tends to disregard mechanisms through which Black women politically engage, such as community and civic engagement. Black women political scientists such as Mae King, Mamie Locke, and Jewel Prestage were the first to chronicle the positionality of Black women in society and politics. Their work showed us that these Black women were strategic, deliberate, and constantly engaged in American politics. Others' efforts have shown that Black women's political organizing and work have traditionally been in service to improving political and economic conditions for the Black community, and that Black women are significant actors as both voters and candidates. To expand our understanding of how Black women decide to run for office and the resources that they are able to access, it is necessary to explore the source of those resources and how Black women are socialized to function politically. Black women have long robustly participated in the political process, and researchers have shown that they participate at higher rates than their white female and male counterparts. This behavior has puzzled scholars because they have tended to rely on scholarship about women's political participation, specifically on Verba, Schlossman, and Brady's resource model. However, Black women don't fit neatly into a paradigm in which money, time, and civic skills predict high levels of political participation that influence candidate emergence. Why not? Because such resources have not always been accessible to Black people. Instead, they find resources in community institutions that assist with political mobilization, teach democratic norms, and cultivate political activity among members. Although Black women are less likely to have resources typically associated with increased political participation, they do, in fact, participate in numerous political activities at high rates. My framework of ambition on the margins allows me to argue that Black women make conscious decisions about the offices they seek based on their assessment of which office enables the greatest community impact and how they can best navigate a marginalizing political structure that offers them limited resources or support in seeking political office. I observed this phenomenon in the various cities in which I lived. I saw Black women running for office and winning, and yet choosing not to pursue higher office in spite of their strong experience and popularity in their districts. By exploring not only women's motivation to run and what resources are available to them, but also their decision to stay in a particular seat, I advance our knowledge about how Black female elites maintain their community-based interests even as they ascend to power. 3 factors are important for such a holistic understanding of Black women and their political ambition: their political socialization, their gendered and racial identity, and their networks. The political socialization of Black women shapes their opinions of themselves and their identity and sense of agency, and it provides mechanisms to navigate the world as a Black girl child and later as a Black woman. Battling both racism and sexism, they experience the world differently from those who are not Black and female. Black women use their enormous community social capital and access to resources via social, civic, and community organizations to fundraise, mobilize voters, and gain access to potential voters. While this framework is confirmed by women across the country, those that not only represent majority Black districts, but also those who reside in districts and municipalities where Black voters make up a small percentage of the voting population, I am aware that my framework means that I focus on a particular type of Black woman candidate. The politicians I interviewed for this book are middle-class, college-educated professionals who have the means to pay membership dues and the time to participate in activities outside of work and home. I am also aware that although Black women are indeed motivated by community, they are also ambitious and have personal goals to ascend in politics. There are numerous Black women who are career politicians who engage in politics for power. However, due to the communities upon which they rely for votes, these women don't deviate very far from opportunities for community engagement. Outline of the book. Chapter 1 introduces the listener to the ways Black women's political work has affected community development, electoral outcomes, and public policy. I explore the limitations of the present literature on political ambition, including the negation of the unique political resources that the communities of Black women offer. The chapter introduces the theoretical framework that provides a roadmap for the book. Chapter 2 challenges existing research by revealing that Black women political elites maintain their community-based interests even when they ascend to power. They never lose sight of the intersectional challenges they faced as they moved up the ranks. Their communities' needs drive their interests, their rise, their agendas, and where they serve. This sense of community is fostered by the racialized, gendered socialization process and the network of community organizations and volunteer work that elevates the standing of Black women in their communities. Chapter 3 moves further into the theoretical framework to explore the facets of the marginalization of Black women. It explores how stereotypes that have long attempted to define and limit opportunities for Black women shape perceptions of potential voters, media, and political parties about Black women candidates. This limits the political strength and advancement of Black women, and how Black female political and social networks resist and respond to those tactics and succeed in advancing their agendas for empowerment and justice for themselves and society. Chapter 4 considers how Black women learn to lead. Political ambition theory has argued women are more inclined to decide to run for office if they are in certain professional careers. But for Black women, this is not applicable as they have often found themselves in the government or nonprofit sector. The majority of the women in my sample not only had careers outside of private industry, but they also had transferable skills they gained from community engagement that they carried into their careers. While in their careers, these women enhanced their leadership skills by coupling their understanding of societal injustices and disparities with their experiences in policy development and implementation. That chapter also explores the challenges and strategies Black women elected officials employ to implement policy preferences on behalf of their constituents. Chapter 5 offers an exploration of how Black women voters view policies and Black women as political leaders. Central to my theoretical argument is that Black women elected officials are invested in their communities. Therefore, it is important to understand the expectations community members have of Black women politicians. Knowing what those possible expectations are can help us understand how Black women present themselves as candidates and elected officials. The concluding chapter summarizes the rich data presented. Despite their impressive levels of participation, Black women still face many challenges in implementing their own and their community's policy preferences. As well as enumerating these, Chapter 6 also raises questions that still need to be addressed about Black women seeking office. 1. The radical imagination of Black women's ambition. This may only be a dream of mine, but I think I can make it real. Ella Baker. I'd like to be remembered as a person who wanted to be free and wanted other people to be also free. Rosa Parks. In 2020, an unprecedented number of Black women sought political office, were at the forefront of voter mobilization efforts, and worked at high levels of campaign management on national campaigns. This robust political participation was particularly noteworthy given Americans' long history of disenfranchising, neglecting, and ostracizing Black women. This political work began as women organized and fought for freedom from slavery to seeking the right to vote. Black women were instrumental in passing the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and today are engaged in activism to change restrictive voter identification laws in numerous states that make it more difficult for some individuals, especially Black and Latino voters, women and men with low incomes, and young and older individuals to vote. In addition, as of 2016, Black women have been the most active group of voters in the country. Speaking on the campaign trail in Iowa as she sought the Democratic nomination for president in 2019, Senator Kamala Harris stated, "I have faith in the American people to know that we will never be burdened by the assumptions of who can do what, based on who historically has done it." The words of then-Senator and currently Vice President Harris echo the belief that, despite the mistreatment Black women have faced, they hold on to a radical faith that their vision for change through leadership is of value and will be accepted by communities outside of their own. Women such as these envisioned and still envision a more just world in which their resistance matters and benefits both those who look like them and society as a whole. Professor Robin D.G. Kelly referred to this imagination as a way to propose a different way out of our social, economic, and political constriction. Kelly stated, "Visionary dreams of a new society don't come from little think tanks of smart people. Revolutionary dreams erupt out of political engagement. Collective social movements are incubators of new knowledge." For Black women, these visionary dreams formed a culture of resistance that formulated a legacy of struggle for family and community and an ethic of caring. I refer to this type of social vision as a radical imagination that propels ambitious elite Black women, despite adversity and marginalization, to translate their vision of justice, equality, access, and freedom into social action. Black women's radical imagination convinces them that individually and collectively they can change a world that tells them they are less than. They express this radical imagination through the tangible work of networks and activism that motivates Black women to seek office for a more equitable society. In short, this radical imagination, combined with community support, often champions and resources Black women's political ambitions. The case of Stacey Abrams. In 2018, a historic number of women ran for office. Of those, Stacey Abrams not only campaigned to become the first Black female governor in the nation, she also worked to raise awareness and develop a network of advocacy to address voter suppression. Her example echoes the history of Black women's political ambition that is and has so often been activated not only by personal ambition, but also by the desire to advance the interests and needs of the Black community and other communities that have been underserved and marginalized. Abrams is not an anomaly. Along with women such as Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Mary Church Terrell, Anna Julia Cooper, Ida B. Wells, Pauli Murray, Constance Baker Motley, Ella Baker, Septima Clark, Joanne Robinson, Fannie Lou Hamer, Shirley Chisholm, Florence Kennedy, Barbara Jordan, Alicia Garza, and many more. Abrams stands in a long line of Black women who dared to use their bodies, minds, and talents to oppose violence, discriminatory laws, social norms, culture, and the possibility of death, not only to make their own voices heard, but also to implement a liberatory form of politics that not only meets the needs of Black women and the Black community, but also society more broadly. Abrams, a native of Gulfport, Mississippi, earned an undergraduate degree from Spelman College, a historically Black college for women. She subsequently earned advanced degrees from the University of Texas at Austin and Yale Law School, and in 2011, she became the first woman and person of color to lead the Georgia House of Representatives as House Minority Leader. Abrams served as such during one of the lowest points of the Democratic Party in Georgia. By 2010, Democrats had become unable to win any statewide race, and in 2012, the state Senate fell to a Republican supermajority. Abrams used her position to connect with both Democrats and likely Democratic voters throughout the state in an effort to understand why the Democratic Party was performing so dismally. She concluded that the changing demographics in the state, along with Democrats shoring up their infrastructure, developing a clear message, and clearly delineating how they were different from Republicans, would connect not only with tried-and-true Democrats, but also those who were disconnected from politics, which could translate into Democratic wins in the future. Similar to the history of Black women organizing that sought to not only advance their own communities, but to also extend the promise of equality for society, Abrams embarked on a political project that imagined greater access to voting that extended beyond a racial construct. She would embark on a 10-year journey to cultivate new political strategists who reflected the diversity of the state and consolidated the multiple long-standing voter registration and mobilization efforts throughout the state into the new Georgia Project, which in a span of 2 years registered over 200,000 voters of color. It is important to note that these long-standing efforts had been led by Black women such as Helen Butler of the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda, Tamika Atkins of Pro-Georgia, and Deborah Scott of Georgia Stand Up, who laid the foundation for much of what the new Georgia Project would be able to achieve. By bringing together the multiple efforts throughout the state, momentum increased and Democrats started to win elections. Abrams' gubernatorial run is largely remembered for her losing by a mere 1.4%, or 55,000 votes, to her opponent, Brian Kemp, who was the sitting Secretary of State, the state's chief election officer. During the election cycle, Kemp faced public pressure to resign from his position due to conflict of interest. He oversaw the election process in which he was involved. Former President Jimmy Carter, who had extensive experience monitoring elections abroad, spoke out about this conflict of interest, saying it ran counter to the most fundamental principle of democratic elections, that the electoral process be managed by an independent and impartial election authority. In addition to questionable ethics of Kemp, the 2018 gubernatorial election was impacted by the 2013 Shelby v. Holder case that ended protections Southern voters, in particular Black Southern voters, found in the Voting Rights Act. With the Department of Justice no longer having the authority to approve changes to voting laws in Georgia, Kemp approached the Secretary of State's role as an opportunity to apply strict guidelines to voting access. In short, Kemp used his office to hinder the Georgians' voter registration efforts by rejecting or delaying registration of 35,000 Georgians from 2013 to 2016. This he did by using the exact match screening process, which meant the state accepts new registrants only if their information precisely matches information in other state databases, including hyphens, accents, and typos. He also used his authority to challenge voter registration efforts by organizations that targeted potential Democratic voters, and the New Georgia Project in particular. He publicly referred to the voter registration cards that arrived at the Secretary of State's office as possibly fraudulent, while acknowledging privately that Democrats were working hard to register voters and that their efforts could lead to wins. Kemp had also purged more than 1.5 million voters from rolls, eliminating 10.6% of voters from the registered electorate between 2016 and 2018 alone. In the election year itself, he removed nearly 700,000, or 10% of the registered electorate, from the rolls. The purge was not due to persons relocating out of state or dying, which would have been valid reasons. Rather, it was persons who had opted not to vote in previous elections. Kemp also placed 53,000 voter registrations in electoral limbo a month prior to the election. The Associated Press estimated that 70% of those were Black voters. Kemp closed more than 200 polling places across the state, the majority of which were in communities that were African American and had consistently voted Democrat. During the election, voters reported long lines, malfunctioning voting machines, and other problems that delayed or thwarted voting in those areas. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution found that precinct closures and longer distances to polling locations likely prevented an estimated 54,000 to 85,000 voters from casting ballots on Election Day. The impact of this was that Black voters were 20% less likely to vote than usual due to long distances to voting locations. Abrams' response to the defeat amplifies the idea of Black women's radical imagination. She did not leave politics. Instead, she concluded that her defeat was not due to her vision for the state or her political acumen. Rather, her razor-thin loss was due to the oppressive efforts that targeted mostly Black communities and potential Democratic voters. This led her to expand the mission of the New Georgia Project. She said it was important not only for building a broad coalition of voters through coordinated voter registration and mobilization efforts, but also to educate voters about efforts to suppress their voting strength. Abrams would subsequently form a new organization called Fair Fight, which continues,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?